Now, if you haven't seen the video on how to organize in collections and do filters before you actually start editing pictures, I recommend you check that out. But for now, we can go ahead and get started directly with this properties icon. And all I have to do is just select the first picture here like I already have. And the properties icon, if I toggle this on and off, you can see that it's this window that we're looking at. And this window here has an additional 5 tabs and a histogram here. We're not going to worry about that right now. But when I'm just eyeballing this picture, it's slightly overexposed. The subject is this chair, because the wood here is a little bit blown out, and this lamp is a little too bright. And as a photo, composition and every subject aside, this picture is not that great. And it makes me think, what would I have done if I could change anything? What would I do to take a better picture next time? And all I have to do is look at this information here that tells me everything I need to know about this picture. So I know I was shooting on the Pen PL8, that I was using my 17mm prime, that I was shooting an aperture priority, and then it tells me the focal length I'm at. And this will change, particularly if you're using a zoom lens. It'll tell you what focal length you were shooting at. And then the 35mm equivalent. But what I'm most interested in now is the exposure settings, because like I said, I feel like this was a little bit too bright. And I can see that I'm at 1/60th of a second. I'm wide open at f1.8. I didn't dial any exposure compensation in or have any exposure shifting going on. I didn't use flash. I was using a custom white balance. Just a natural color picture profile, which is kind of irrelevant in RAW anyway, as well as these other settings, contrast, sharpness settings, but gradation. Now I see everything that I was shooting at. And then here, another important one is the ISO setting, 6400. And if I were to take this picture again, and these are the settings that the camera chose based on being on aperture priority and auto ISO. I would have dialed in or went to manual mode and took this picture again with different settings, because I know I can handhold a camera for a static subject like this. It's fine. I can handhold a camera down to about 1/30th of a second. And by lowering the shutter speed, I can also lower my ISO down here from 6400 down to a lower ISO. But how much difference can it make? Let's see how close can we get to 1/30th of a second in full stops. And I do that by looking at 1/160th of a second shutter speed, and I divide that by 2 to get the first full stop difference. So that would now bring me down to 1/80th of a second. And I know I can handhold 1/80th of a second, or slower than that, so let's divide that by 2 for another stop, and we're down to 1/40th of a second. So if I bring down the shutter speed 2 full stops, I know that I can still get a sharp image handheld for a static subject like this. What would that bring the ISO down to? If I want to bring the ISO down 2 full stops, the ISO, and this is an auto ISO, so the camera will do this for you, but it'll go down to 1 stop, which is divide by 2, you get 3200 ISO, and another stop, you divide that by 2, you get 1600 ISO. So if I had just lowered the shutter speed down to 1/40th of a second, I would be at ISO 1600 instead of 6400. So I would have less grain, I would have richer colors, I would have more dynamic range, and all the other good things that go with having a lower ISO. I would have gotten a better picture if I had just took a minute to dial in a slower shutter speed. And that's really the power of having this information. It helps you analyze what the camera is doing on its own versus what you can do, and maybe do a better job than the camera has chosen in terms of settings. Some other things I might think about is, like down in here, I had the contrast and sharpness at 0. I probably would have dialed in a +2 in contrast and a -2 on the sharpness, because I found that particularly at higher ISOs, I don't like to have the sharpness on because it makes the grain look unpleasant, and it's a very subjective choice. You can experiment and see what you're happy with, but for me I like to turn the sharpness down. And there was no changes on highlights and shadows. So with this information and giving some thought to the settings that I want to try the next time I go out, I can experiment a little bit with this raw file before I go out again and see if those settings would have made any difference in this picture. And I can do that by editing. Now I'm not going to go into the full editing features of this software. I'm just going to talk about the very specific things I've mentioned here based on what I saw in the properties window. So let's go into the editing, and that's this icon here. It's already on, but if I toggle this on and off, you can see that this window pops up. And then you have the various tabs here. And this is for cropping. Okay, so this one here is the colors or basic editing settings. And most of these settings you can also set in camera when you're out in the field. So that's why I like to experiment using the software, so that when I go out again I can put these settings in the camera and get the image I want straight out of camera versus, you know, coming back into Olympus Workspace and playing with it. But again, let's see what I can do. So we talked about I can't do anything about exposure because that's already been fixed here with shutter speed and aperture, etc. But I can dial in a little bit of exposure compensation with the software, because like I said, I thought this was a little bright. So let's checkbox this, and let's go down maybe about 1 stop. And that looks about right. And already I can see a little bit more of the wood here on the front, which helps, I think, the picture overall. And I think we can increase the contrast and reduce the sharpness as well. So let's go here into contrast and crank that up to a +2. And again, these are the same settings you'll find in your camera. And already that looks a little better to me, a little more punch to it. And then I'm going to turn off some of the sharpening, and I think that's over here. So let's turn the sharpening down to -2. And you probably can't see this online, but the image is a little bit softer looking now, but that's okay. It's less grain is showing, and that's just my, like I said, subjective choice. Let's see, was there anything else I might want to try? The gradation, is it normal? Sometimes I like to try a low-key gradation, which is also a setting you can do in your camera. So let's try low-key and see how that looks. Alright, and that looks okay. I kind of like this, and this is why I like to experiment, because I have all of the settings I used when I originally took the picture, and then I can kind of play with it a little bit to see what settings I would use the next time I go out if I were to take the same or similar picture. And that's really the power of this software, is to help you understand your camera, the settings it chooses, and how you can probably choose better settings to get a better image. Because if I had shot at ISO 1600, I would have definitely gotten more of this wood color back in than I am at ISO 6400. So that's definitely one thing I would have changed. I would have dialed in a little bit of exposure compensation, which may have also lowered the ISO, and I would have definitely added some contrast and shot in low-key gradation. So these are all settings I could have done in camera when I was out in the field, but did not, and that's what helps me go out and take the next set of pictures the way I like, with the look I'm kind of going for. Now, just so I don't leave any loose ends, let's just finish this up real quick. You know, right away I can tell this picture is a little bit crooked, so let me go into, let's see, where is it? Over here in the crop. Let's crop this for something for Instagram, say 1:1, and straighten it out a little bit. Let's try that. That looks about right, and it looks like I wasn't completely level with the picture because it's a little bit wider up here than it is down here, so let me apply some keystoning. Where is that? Here? Okay. And the keystone here, check this box, let's try minus, yeah, -5 looks about right. And I don't like this white bar up here from the wall, so I'm going to crop that out. Let's go back to the cropping tool. Oh, and I don't like this black bar down here, so I'm going to move that up, move this down, center this a little bit differently, bring this up, and that's looking better to me. I like that. I think good enough for Instagram anyway.